Can you take me higher?
Do 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 do.
To a place where
Damn, this thing keeps locking.
With golden streams.
with golden streams.
That's good. A little run at the end.
Oh, you want to run? With golden streams.
Your turn, Leah.
That sounded so auto-tuned.
Yeah, I was like, it was very auto.
This episode will be auto-tuned. Welcome to our auto-tuned episode.
Why are you so good?
really good. I'm like, you gotta put a fan in front of me.
Yeah, I'm like, is that T-Pain?
So apparently we're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what we're here for?
if you want.
I came to
sure?
talk shit about Jonah Hill.
Is that what this episode is
Yeah,
about?
pretty much.
What were you about to say, Leah?
Honestly, say.
A new song.
That's not the theme song, but we're gonna keep making them up because that's fun. If I keep singing, I'm gonna say something about Leah doing the worm. Hello, everybody. Honestly, same.
Ooh, honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly,
Honestly,
same.
same. Honestly,
Honestly,
same.
same. Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Honestly, same.
Welcome to the show. Hi, our dear Samesies.
Hi, Samesies.
Hey, Samesies.
Wow, I gotta be honest, I love that. I really do. I'm a big fan of the Samesies.
It's like a mixture of like bestie, you know,
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of. And,
Yeah.
And that's what people say, you know, like, Samesies.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
Love it. I love it. Well, hello, our Samesies. You are the
Hi, friends.
Samesies. We are honestly same. I, in particular, am Ross.
I'm Brittany. I almost said I'm Leah. I really almost said it.
I was like, wait. I was like,
I, in particular, am not Ross or Brittany, but I am, in fact, Leah.
I really was, and I'm Leah.
you really
Did you
were.
feel it? Yeah, I really
did.
was.
Like, as soon as you started saying it, I was like, she's not going to say her name.
Honestly, you can just be me too. You know?
Oh,
Like,
I feel
wow.
like that's fine.
She is not
No
saying her
questions
name in
asked.
this one. She is just not.
I'm incognito.
Well, hey, guys, we're having an awful lot of fun making this podcast, right?
Should we bring it down a little bit? Are we having too much fun?
Yeah, maybe we should be a little toxic.
Bum, bum, bum,
Oh, okay. I thought you were doing the theme song again. I was like, oh, well, that'll
We're
be
doing our theme song.
Yeah, your guys' theme song. Yes, of course.
Yes, it needed to be on the recording. Do it one more time.
You want me to do it
Spears.
auto-tuned?
Perfect.
Maybe SpongeBob singing it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure what
everybody
that is.
is gonna love it. They're gonna
Yes.
literally turn this episode on and be like, "Holy shit, shut up!" and just turn it back off.
No, they're gonna be like, when did I switch this podcast to Brittany Spears?
Yeah,
That's true.
It's uncanny.
That's true. Or T-Pain.
Or
Yes.
Like, damn, I hit my T-Pain top
Damn,
hits
my fucking
playlist.
shuffle is on point today.
Fuck, I thought I was gonna listen to Honestly Same, but instead,
Pain.
it's Honestly Pain. Toxicity is what we're talking about.
That's
this
right, baby.
episode. We are going to talk about toxicity, all the forms of it, and all the things that we've dealt with, and how we deal with it. How are we kicking this one off? Is it like, do you want to jump into like laying out kind of different forms of toxicity? Because I know sometimes people don't know that they're being toxic.
Yeah.
There's toxic behaviors that are sort of like subconscious behaviors that we don't really identify. Because, I mean, it's pretty obvious, like, if somebody's being toxic, if someone's like, fuck you, I hate you, you're shitty, blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yes.
okay, yeah, you're outwardly being toxic. But I think the bigger thing to dive into is those subconscious forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it's like friends are doing things that's like, hey, you don't really know that you're actually being real toxic. And you're
Yeah.
making this effectively a toxic relationship. Same thing
Yes.
with relationships. So where do we begin?
Well, I would say the most obvious forms of toxicity are kind of right out in front of you. You know what I mean? Like, we've all dealt with a toxic person in our lives where you're just like, wow, every situation that like this person is involved in seems like it's somehow like just drenched in like drama and tea and, you know, things that I don't necessarily want to take part in. But you feel stuck in that situation sort of because you're like, oh, but like,
You don't want to add to it.
yeah, they're like, oh, but you know, this person's been in our friend group for all this time, or I've been in this relationship for all this time. And it's hard to just jump out of something that feels a lot of, I think of why people stay in toxic situations is there's a comfort aspect of it because maybe it's bad, but it's not bad all the time.
Right.
Like when
yeah.
it's good, it's great, and when it's bad,
Right.
it's bad.
And
Yeah.
we find a way as humans to normalize things, whether they're normal or not.
Yes.
So subconsciously, like dealing with things and being like, they had a bad day. Or when it comes to like gang mentality, we have just normalized certain things where people will jump on without having all of the information or what have you. Don't know where I was going with that.
Perfect. Love
I'm
that.
so glad that you guys allowed me to be on this podcast.
Well, you're not in the shared note in which we build this podcast
That's so
and the
true.
ideas for.
I do show up
You can't
just
be
for
in
the
that.
vibes. You can't be in that.
You can't be in the planning process or anything that we do to get the show going, but you can show up for the vibes.
Yes, I do. And I do.
You do indeed show up for the vibes. Something that I was going to go off of what you said is like, it even took me some time, sometimes you can't identify a toxic situation until you're removed from it, right?
Yeah.
Until
Yes.
you were like
Hindsight.
outside of it. Then you've got the hindsight. Like I can identify like definitely not as bad as it could have been. But it's like I look back at like my high school friends and stuff like that and not saying they're bad people or anything terrible happened. But when I look back, I'm like, oh, those were actually kind of a lot of toxic friendships.
Yeah.
Because they were centered around bullying each other if they didn't, if someone didn't do the thing that they thought was cool, or if they started venturing out into something different. Like the moment that like I started living a slightly different life that wasn't just small town life, I started to get shit on for it. But it's like at the time I'm like, oh, like maybe I am being stupid. And these are my friends. Like these have been my
Right.
friends for years. So like they're not, there's nothing toxic about this. It's just like how it is, I guess. But it's like looking back at those things like, oh no, you might not have like outwardly been doing something majorly toxic, like starting fights all the time or all this sort of stuff. But those tiny behaviors,
Which I think, especially as kids, are majority, aside from the group mentality, like semi, like subconscious. Kids are just shitty. Their frontal lobe's not there.
right.
So a lot of the time you don't go straight to like, oh, this person is trying to hurt me, because you already aren't thinking about doing that. So why would you go there first?
Right.
So it's definitely like a lot of like diving into where that's coming from.
And that's like, I think like, when you're teenagers, you should be slightly become more aware of like these sort of things, but we're also all immature who, we still don't know anything, even though we like to think that we do. But I definitely think like I look back at that time period for sure. And I'm like, like, again, it's not that they're bad people. It's not that I like hate them or anything like that, but I'm like, oh, there were a lot of like really toxic behaviors that as I grew older and grew up and moved away from those situations and all that sort of stuff, I was beginning to identify. I'm like, oh, that's a weird toxic thing that I actually have left over.
So were you doing it, or were you just thinking it like subconsciously? Does that make sense? Like kind of having the same shitty remarks inside you, or you were just still dealing with those remarks toward you?
Not so much dealing with it, but noticing that I would most often think in that way. I wouldn't really act on it that much, but like thinking of just like immediately being negative about something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Immediately like, oh, this is fucking stupid. And that person must mean fucking this because they did this. And it's like, well, no, that's actually not the...
Right.
And I know that's also just a part of like growing up. You identify these things, you learn that not everybody's out to get you and not everybody's an asshole and everyone's dealing with their own things, blah, blah, blah. But when I definitely think back to that time frame, I can see that a lot of those kind of negative thoughts, negative behaviors often would turn into on friends' parts, a lot of like negative actions that again weren't like overtly terrible. It's not like they did anything terrible, but in general, just very much like, wait, why are we talking to this person like this? Why are we making this decision?
It's
Why
like
are we...
microaggression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it's like, I think that now for those of us, or, for anybody who does kind of become more aware of those things, who does take accountability for things, who does own up to stuff, not just saying like, oh yeah, I guess I was a dick and then repeating the behavior over and over.
Right.
Like that's not actually learning anything. But I think especially when you become an adult, you start to notice these things. And for me, I feel like when someone now as an adult, when I see somebody leading from what I will just say like an immature place that leads to toxic behavior or interactions, I more so am like, oh, you like really haven't learned. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's and like, yes, if somebody again is straightforward just being an asshole,
Right.
sure. I would ultimately say we're probably not talking about that much in this episode, though, because
Yeah.
that's obvious.
Yeah, because I feel like that's not even really toxic because it's
That's
just
just a straight up bullying. Yeah, toxic is
that's
kind of
just-
almost like it goes under the radar, where you have to question like what was your intention behind what just happened.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you know, for better or worse, like I don't know, like there's still people today as an adult that I identify do very like weird, immature, toxic things.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the thing of like, well, is it my job to bring this up to them? How do I have this conversation with them? Do I even need to? How do I
That's-
deal with it? Like,
Something that makes me super upset is when something toxic happens and then it is like bled into your life and now it's your responsibility to do something about it. I can't stand that. I know, again, most toxic things are kind of subconscious, so they didn't purposefully put it on you. But it is just a trickle down effect where the bad thing happened, whatever rude thing, whatever in the friend group or to you or whatever. And just to add insult to injury, you now have to like help remedy it, even though you were like a victim in it.
Yes.
So my question based off of that, we might have to like go back, but I think this question still applies. Do you think it's toxic to hold grudges?
I guess it depends on if it's like, okay, is it you holding a grudge like you're completely like done with this person but you haven't let go of it, or are you talking like holding a grudge like, oh, I'm still actively involved with this person in some way, like maybe they're still like part of my friend group and I'm talking bad about this person to everybody else, or like I guess it's situational to me.
Yeah. For me, if I answer it, mine would just be like kind of someone did me wrong, something toxic, whether it's subconsciously or consciously. If I've made the effort to like remedy it and they've doubled down or they're unapologetic or anything like that, I will take that situation to my grave. Maybe that's toxic of me, but that is just how I work.
right.
But that's okay if you were like, yeah, that's a little toxic. I'm gonna be like, then I'm a little toxic.
Right. Well,
Everybody's
we
a
all are
little
probably a little
toxic,
toxic in
probably.
some way. Yeah. For me, I feel like when I look at those sort of things, the way I label it is I can forgive, but I don't forget.
Yeah.
So like if I'm holding a grudge, I might treat that person fine or interact with them or whatever, depending on what it is. If sometimes you
Right.
just need to cut somebody out, it's like, hey, you get less of me, and that's just how this is. And
That's repercussions for your actions.
Exactly. But I think a lot of times, like, because you know there is an idea of holding a grudge only hurts you, because yes, you know, maybe if they want to be your friend and you're holding a grudge against them and they don't get to hang out with you, that bothers them. But ultimately, that's usually not what happens. When we hold grudges, we're the ones that are playing out all the scenarios in our heads, and they might not even be thinking about it at all, especially if it is a toxic person
Right.
who does not know that they have done these toxic things or does not care to take the accountability for it.
Yeah.
They're probably not thinking about it. So we are sitting, and when we do hold those grudges, we're only hurting ourselves. That grudge, that internal grudge, effectively doesn't really do much to them, because for
True.
you know, the
I
bad
like to
part
think
is
that I'm like the best person in every single person's life, so that does do something
right.
to them.
I mean, of course, I would love to think that I am the main character of everyone else's life.
So
Of course, and sometimes yes, that can turn into that. But you know, the shitty thing about toxic or shitty people is like most of the time they're
move
not,
on.
they don't.
You were
They're
just like
it's just a thing.
stepping stone.
Yep, they hurt somebody, they moved on. They might be a little sad of like, oh my God, our friendship is different, or oh my gosh, you know, we dated, now our friendship is different, or whatever, you know, because you know, whatever it is. But ultimately, like if they're actually toxic, they're not really going to be holding the accountability for that, which means they're not going to hold the space for it. So that's the hard thing is like, I honestly try to not let something take shape of a grudge inside of me, because like sometimes I feel like grudges means you're, and this is just my opinion, and somebody else probably has a smarter way to put this, but like to me, sometimes grudges means I'm waiting for something bad to finally get you back.
Karma.
Yes.
okay, well
And
then
that's-
I stand by what I say.
And yes, and that's ultimately fine. You can still want someone to like, but I think for me, I'm very stern with like any sort of relationship. I mean, friendship, acquaintanceship, anything like that. Where like if I have a reason to hold a grudge, I'll hold that to you, and until you prove you are otherwise to me, you are that. That's
Yeah.
my grudge, right? Is I'm not necessarily like, well, I wonder if they're going to apologize to me. I wonder if they are going to, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, I do want stupid people to get karma to them. Like, I absolutely do. But I don't hold it so much inside of me where I'm like, man, F this person. Like, they're so fucking annoying, blah, blah, blah. Because then, yes, I am, like, effectively.
Yeah.
I'm hurting myself more than I'm hurting them. But the way around that, to me, is I'm like, I can still hold a grudge, not necessarily want somebody in my life, and not have to care about it.
That's how I feel. Like, again, like you said, I'll forgive.
Yeah.
Ish. If they're sorry.
Right.
But I will not be forgetting. But
Yeah.
I will not be wishing ill will on anyone, even if some people deserve it.
Right.
But when I do happen to hear whatever pivot their life is taking and it doesn't sound great, I will be like, karma is that girl.
Right. Which is ultimately also fair, because again, it's like, it's different if, you know, there was like anybody you ever interacted with, you were like, man, fuck them, 'cause you're not me. Like, you know, then you're the toxic person, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I do think when it comes down to grudges, like, I hold a form of grudges for sure, because I won't forget. I
Yeah.
really won't forget. There are many things that are often probably subconscious forms of toxicity that people have done to me that I'm like, oh, that's what I
Yes.
associate you with.
I think
and
you
until
know.
you show me otherwise.
I have like a very good memory. Like I remember every conversation I've ever had with anyone. I can literally tell you what you ate last week if you told me.
Right.
And so I think that's why it's hard for me to.
What
I don't.
lunch?
Taco Bell,
What?
a Fiesta burrito,
Fiesta veggie burrito. Yeah.
veggie burrito. Just one.
Thank you.
It was our order was $5.
It was exactly.
Yeah.
It was exactly $5. That was odd.
$1 menu.
Oh.
Ever heard of it?
Wow. Nope.
Okay, what the hell are we talking about?
You were talking about how the fact that you often remember all the
You have a
details
really good
of
Yes.
what something.
So a
Except
lot
you
of the
couldn't
time,
remember what you were talking about.
Yes, correct. I never know in the moment. Okay, long-term memory. A lot of the time, why I end up with a grudge is the belittling of the feelings. Like we've talked about this in other episodes, where, and I think this plays a lot into toxicity. If someone tells you that you have hurt them, I know everyone has heard this. You hurt them. That is their reality. Does not matter if you feel that you didn't. You still have to like work with them to meet in the middle. So a lot of the times, the things that I find unforgiving is if I'm brave enough to say that you've hurt me, which is very, very hard for me to do, even if it's very obvious to everyone else on the planet, and you try to tell me in any way, shape, or form that you did not.
That's gaslighting.
Right.
Like
That's gaslighting.
1,000%.
Yeah, so that's extremely toxic. But yeah, then I have like just an internal thing where I'm like, almost like a radar, like bad person, and karma always lets me know what happens.
Right.
Well, and something to note also is like normally, so I would say toxicity and gaslighting kind of go hand in hand. Also, toxicity and it's temporary people in your life.
Yeah.
Like you ever have people where like you maybe look at it like is like from the rear view mirror, or even if you're in it and you're like, I already know that this is like, as much as even maybe you want it to work out and you want
You
that
see the
person to
good
be
in the person.
you know that it's a time bomb and that they are a temporary situation in your life. And even though you would do anything and everything to try to make that person like a statue in the center of your
You wanna lift up the
garden
good.
of life, it's like toxic situations have to be temporary. You
Yeah.
can only stay in a toxic situation for so long before eventually you get to a point where like something's got to
It'll
give.
deteriorate itself.
Yes. And whether that's them finally getting bored because you've become a numb shell of yourself and they're like, well, I've done everything I can do, and then they move on to whatever, or you stand up for yourself and decide like, I'm not going to do this anymore. It's always temporary. There's almost always, if a person is being toxic, they are 9 times out of 10 going to gaslight if you call them out on their toxic behavior, and make an excuse for why they're not being toxic. And we've all done it. I mean, we've all been toxic at some point in our lives, whether we wanted to be or thought we were. We've all had a moment where you can look back and be like, ooh, wasn't the best thing I could have done.
I think you talked about one of yours on an episode when your friend group like decided one
Yeah.
girl should not be in the group because she was toxic, but then you guys removed her toxically.
Yeah. It was like in a way where it was like, yes, this person was so toxic, like to our friendship, that it was like drama was constantly happening in our friend group. But the way that it was executed, it wasn't, hey, so we all feel this way and we want to do something about it. It was, listen, whoever gets in a fight with this person next, like, we're all just going to take that person's side and tell this person basically to like F off. And that was not like untoxic of us to do it that way. And even though, you know, the problem person was like eradicated from the group or whatever, it was like, okay, but what does that say about us as a group if, you know, we handled it the way that we handled it? So I feel like everybody can look at those situations for sure and be like, oh, I've been toxic, I've done toxic things. And in that moment, you're kind of like, is this the right thing? And there's almost a high that goes along with it of like,
you got to see it through. You shouldn't, but a lot of times we tell ourselves that we need to see whatever the thing is through. I wouldn't have made this decision if it wasn't the right one.
Yeah.
We don't like to like digest that in the middle of doing whatever the thing is.
Right. Absolutely.
Ross, do you have a specific toxic thing that you remember that you needed to hold yourself accountable to?
I can't think of like specific ones, but I definitely know just like me in high school, just giving into the like that side of peer pressure, like, which I know we're going to kind of lean into like the group toxicity sort of thing. I think that's where I mostly like lived in high school. It's like I was good at not giving into actual peer pressure or really ramping up like something toxic that was happening, but I would play a part because I would sort of be there. I would play like a tiny part in it where I'm like, I don't necessarily know why we're doing this, and I don't know if I like it. But yeah, I guess let's all gang up on this one friend and tell him that he can't hang out with us today. A lot of times
there's just no thought behind it. And so it's not even going, oh, I'm kind of struggling with this. It's just like you just go with the current that's already like picked up.
Right.
And then you're kind of sitting there like, this is but everyone else is doing it, so it must not be that bad.
Right. And that's the thing is I think that the things that I later would identify as toxic behaviors, whether it was like in relationships or friendships or anything, were things that were like very normal for all the friends I was around at that point in time to be doing.
Yeah.
Like how they would speak and what they would do and how they would treat somebody. Again, like I will say I got lucky and like none of my friends in high school were like genuinely like bad people.
Yeah.
But just those like weird toxic behaviors that you just don't know because you're immature and you're angry that this friend didn't want to hang out with you or this girl didn't like you or this whatever. Like when you're mad at those like random things and you're of course like reacting in very toxic ways. Like, so I'm not going to throw like, you know, high school people under the bus or something. Like they really didn't do anything.
Most people are toxic in high school.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's
so you can't think of anything that was specifically you that you were like, yeah, in hindsight, that was a little too far. That was a little too much.
I don't know. Like
outside of the group thing, I would say there were definitely times where like I felt like I was like there were times where I felt pushed into the point where it was toxic, which is another thing that we're going to talk about later. But like, I don't know if you've ever had those types of moments either, where like I was in a relationship where my trust had been depleted to a point where I literally like, I knew it was like wrong of me or toxic of me, but I felt like I remember going through somebody's phone because I had a gut instinct. And I was right, but still not necessarily like the most like level-headed decision I could have made. And so I feel like me being toxic by means of not trusting that person, like I can definitely identify like, I don't think that going through somebody's phone is like a great idea or like a great thing that I could have done. But
and
like
when I'm trying to think, like I feel like the examples I would give are probably like me in the high school relationship I was in. I just acted like a normal high school boy where I'm like, oh, why do you want to even talk to me? I want to hang out with my fucking friends. Like, God, what the fuck? And then like we stay together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it's like I don't feel like the next phase that I go to that like is popping up is like when I would project my wants and needs onto other people. And I don't know if that's necessary. Like, I know I'm giving shitty examples, but like, to me, that ended up being a toxic behavior.
That can be, for
where
sure.
I'm like, somebody tells me that they want to be involved in a creative idea. I'm like, you must want it as bad as I do. So I'm not going to consider your part in this. I'm just going to take ownership and tell you this is how it's going to happen because you want to be involved in it with me. So this is just how it's going to be. And again, I'm sure that there are like actual toxic things. Like especially if I dug into like high school years or like early 20s or something, but like, I don't know, even like back then, like again, definitely did toxic things, but I always did. I think we talked about this on another episode. Like even as a kid, like I remember I got in like the story of getting in trouble by the teachers because like other kids around me were like doing things, and I was like, oh my god. That's kind of how I always was. I was always like the quiet one that like my toxicity came from like eventually I would just give in and be like, all right, I'll play along too. But my toxicity, I personally feel like, unless I'm forgetting something, often came from being the bystander who didn't do anything.
Which is toxic.
Is toxic, yeah. Exactly. So it's like not necessarily in that sense am I like, I was for sure never leading it. Because again, even as a young, immature 18-year-old, I wasn't like trying to actively always lead those things, although I absolutely played a part. But I was more so like, oh, all these friends are doing these things and saying these things, and yeah, that is funny. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if it is, but if I say something, well, then all the toxicity comes to me, and I'm outed as the fucking idiot who doesn't want to have fun.
And that's what I'm saying. Why I hold grudges against people that put me in that position.
Well, and I think my grudge is identifying that we are different, and you don't have to have a place in my life.
Yeah, I personally feel like when I kick someone out of my life, that I have done something dirty to them because apparently I am such a great asset.
Right. Well, but I will also say there's nothing wrong with holding value to yourself of being like, hey, if you were genuinely being the most toxic person and you're saying that, Lee and I probably have to sit and be like, well, hey, when you did that thing, you're not actually, that's kind of the wrong way to look at it. But it's like when you do feel wronged and you feel like you've done something to try and like resolve an issue or fix things or change things, and the only solution is, hey, our relationship can't be what it was. We can be cordial, but otherwise I don't really want to talk at all if that's possible. If that's
cool with you.
Yeah, but it's like, I do sometimes think there is value in being like, well, hey, like maybe, I don't know, you don't know what you lost. Like I was very supportive to you. I was I was a close friend. I wanted to be there for you. And you took advantage of that and you trashed it and you were toxic and whatever. And so cool. We're going to get rid of that now. Like I would say, like I keep referencing the high school stuff because it's like
that's when you're young and stupid.
Right. But it's like now as an adult, like even though I still have some like resemblance of friendships with those people in high school, we definitely like barely ever speak. We're not involved in each other's lives. But when we are, it's like a kind of a very faded version of that. But I actually, at first I was like, oh, this is so strange. And now I've really settled into the place of like, no, this is just how it is.
And people just grow in different directions. Some people have a little bit more of that in them.
Right.
And sometimes we just grow like in different directions where you don't see if they've changed, they've bettered themselves, whatever.
Right. And it's like, there is like a friend of mine from high school who like, we were incredibly close. And I can see that we've grown into two different individuals, but I've also been able to identify that this person doesn't believe that they're ever wrong, doesn't want to take accountability to anything, like thinks that everything they believe is correct and thinks that they're like the shit basically. And they're doing what you said you were worried about. They are doing the whole like, well, why aren't we friends? We should be friends. We're supposed to be so close. You're supposed to be there for me, blah, 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 because I'm such an asset. And
you can't do the work for them.
No. And it's like, well, when you're showing somebody that they're not an asset to your life and hey, you care about them, but no, we don't need to talk all the time because I do not think that you're that great of a person, unfortunately. And until you can take accountability for that, it's not my job to do anything for you. And it's not my job to see you as the victim in every one of your circumstances that you effectively put yourself into. So it's like, that then turns into, I might slightly be holding a grudge against that person for maybe some things they did to me or like their immaturity or whatever. But it's also, I sit and I'm like, well, maybe they're just toxic and maybe they're just not for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I try to not dive deep into the grudge thing, but also like I know my parts in toxicity, even though I've directly been toxic, they often come from that, like the group mentality of, because even like in later years into adulthood, like there's things that I've identified with friends groups and I'm like, oh, this is actually really toxic of all you guys to do. And even though I will play the part, I will eventually be like, once I'll identify it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't actually want to do this anymore. You know, obviously voiding specifics, but like, you know, there's a friends group that I'm a part of, and there's like all these jokes that all the friends make about one friend in particular, and he laughs and plays along. But at some point I could tell, I was like, he doesn't enjoy this. He's laughing and playing along.
Nobody wants to be the butt of the joke every time.
Yeah.
No.
If it was
And-
something where everybody was like, you know, doing it to each other and it was, you know, whatever.
Right.
But
And-
like if you're constantly the one that's getting to be the butt of the joke, I feel like then you're eventually going to get to a point where you're like, why am I hanging out with people that are treating me this way?
Right. And you know, it's like I would see him start to react these ways and I'm like, oh, this isn't funny to him actually. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to stop and everyone else will continue because they have not identified their toxic behavior. But I do think there's like, I feel like the group toxicity is a thing that like, that isn't a high school mentality.
No.
I think group toxicity sticks around forever unless anybody learns a lesson.
Yeah.
Because again,
Unless
it's like,
you are the person that it has been like put against, if you are still at this age continuing to be in those types of groups,
yeah,
then yeah, you just have not been, you haven't had to be the butt of the joke.
right. And again, it's like in comparison, it's like I can think back to the high school stuff and like, all right, wow, you were a douchebag when you did those things, and then now it's like as you grow up and then you start to identify, wait, maybe we're not necessarily being douchebags. We're not going as far as high school us, you know,
Right.
was going. But also we might be hurting someone's feelings. We might be making someone the butt of the joke who doesn't need to be the butt of the joke. We're continuing the joke so much longer than what it was maybe
It's
funny
not
the first
funny
time.
anymore, yeah.
But it's like, all right, now we're beating a dead horse and we think it's hilarious because we're all here and we're all together. And it's like, I still feel like, you know, and there's occurrences that I've experienced that where like I will share something with somebody in good conscience and then I get, you know, basically bombarded by a gang mentality of like shitting all over me for it. And I'm like, yeah, there's still circumstances where I'm like, aren't we all almost 30?
Yeah.
Like, I know we're trying to be funny, but like, this wasn't even supposed to be a funny thing. And
Yeah.
now you've effectively kind of ruined this moment
Yeah.
and also sort of changed our friendship a little bit. You've changed our dynamic a little bit because now I don't know necessarily what I can trust you with. And not that I'm like going to push you away, but it's like, oh, well, when I give you information, like that's what you turn it into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you don't necessarily care. You don't necessarily add something positive to it. And again, in those situations that I'm thinking of, they're not necessarily trying to be toxic. They're not trying to be shitty, but it's the subconscious gang mentality of like, oh, well, everybody's joking about it.
Right.
We're just trying to be funny.
Well, and I think one of the main things about toxicity is that it's kind of like what I said earlier. Like when it's good, it's great. And when it's bad, it's really bad. So like when you're in a group mentality, when it comes to toxic stuff, when you're in the group and you're like having one of those moments where you're on the side of stuff where it's like, oh, look at all of us. We're all, we all agree. But that one guy, he's got the wrong idea and we're going to, alienate him for this thought or whatever. And then it feels great when you're part of the group that like
Right.
everybody
That's just like
thinks
a
the same thing.
human.
But then when you're the one that disagrees with the group or whatever it might be, it's like, oh, okay, now I realize like how much it sucks to be on like when the shoe's on the other foot. Like because you don't realize, I mean, you do realize, but like that's part of toxicity is it's literally like, oh, when it's going the way I want it to go, it's great. But when it's not going the way that I want it to go, it's really bad. Like I feel degraded. I feel betrayed in a lot of ways because that's the whole point. Like toxic relationships, it's like the people that you're supposed to be holding close to you, whether they're friends, whether it's a relationship, it's like these are people that you've trusted with, your feelings or your secrets or whatever it might be. And you feel betrayed because it's like, oh, you're going to take this sensitive thing that I've given you and you're going to essentially destroy it in a way or vandalize it in a way where suddenly it's not the same anymore.
Right.
And so you're like, oh, I gave you this extra special little piece of me, or this like excerpt from my life and trusted you with it, and this is what you did with it, kind of a thing. And you want so badly for them to have the reaction to that thing that you're presenting to them in the way that you want them to react, that you're almost just like, oh, that's just the way they are. Like, there's always that like underlying, they're gaslighting you. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Like,
took
you're
it the
taking
wrong
it so
way.
seriously. Like, and then it's you that's the problem. And then you're like, oh.
Yeah, now you're the drama.
Yeah. And that's the thing I think that's really difficult about the group mentality is it's like, yeah, there's always going to be some form of control happening where usually there's one person that's leading the charges that makes everybody else feel like you're either with me or I'm against you.
Yes. If we're not friends, we're enemies.
Yeah.
That's a lot of like, I feel like my high school experience was like, there was like kind of a person in charge that everybody was like, oh, you're the coolest. And then that like dispersed into everything. So it's like, if he didn't want to hang out with somebody that day, everyone else was like, oh yeah, I guess we're not, like, haha, don't tell him where we're at. And it's like,
that's horrible.
What the fuck are you talking about? But it's like, what I think that turned into for me was, because I wasn't ever leading the charge, once I started becoming more of my own person, what my toxic behavior turned into was being too focused on being the head of whatever was going on. Like, once I started getting out of high school, I was just so worried about being cool. I just wanted people to think I was cool. So I would do things that I hoped someone thought was cool, regardless of what it did to somebody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like one particular, and this is not like a major story at all. It's probably stupid to share, but like, I do have it burned into my brain where like I have thought about it as an adult and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Where like some friends and I went to a show and a band that we all thought were cool played the show, and it was like a small show. So it was like you could easily talk to the band and hang out with them. I, at the time, was so worried about like being cool guy that they were like, oh, we should go like meet him and talk to him. And I was like, he's just a person. I did that shit.
Yeah.
Where I was like, dude, he's just a guy. Because I was so worried about being like also as cool as that guy and perceived as cool
You're
as
like,
that
I'm
guy.
not really worried about him.
I'm like, it's no big deal. And I remember like we literally left the venue and they were like, man, I don't know, it'd be cool to meet. Because again, this is me trying to be badass leader guy because that's what I experienced in other friends groups. So I was like, well, now it's my turn. And I mean, but I learned it a cooler way though. I'm not going to, but it's like, no, you literally just made those people feel bad.
For something they were excited about.
For not wanting to go meet the vocalist of this band.
That
and I
they
remember,
enjoyed, yeah.
And we literally went back to the car and I was like, yeah, it's not a big deal. And I distinctly remember them being like, I don't know, man. I kind of want to go meet him. I'm going to go take a picture and meet him. And I literally stayed in the fucking car like an asshole.
Yeah.
I literally like sat there. And
that
I
was a
like,
good story.
And I was like,
That's a good one.
and like I wasn't over the top
You
being
didn't
an
punch
asshole.
someone in the face.
No, I wasn't like, fuck you guys,
You
you
said,
nerds.
I'm coming with you and I'm punching him in the face.
Yeah, I
You're not
wasn't
like, all right, find your own ride home.
Yeah, no, I wasn't like, you guys are fucking losers for doing that. I was just so concerned about me feeling and being cool that I literally
Did the most uncool thing.
did the most uncool thing and then made them feel weird. And then when they fucking did the right thing and stood up for themselves and went and met the dude and took pictures, I was like, I wish I got a fucking picture with him. Yeah, you fucking idiot. You decided to be a fucking asshole instead. And that's not a huge deal of like really being toxic. But like when I think back to that moment, it's like half of my brain was like, what the why are you doing this? And the other half was like,
it was an ego thing. Once you've already said, I'm not into it.
Because I feel like that's often what I was surrounded by.
Well, and I think a big part
egos are toxic.
Yeah, well, and part of toxicity is not only like the ego side of it, but also like not backing down when you do figure out that you're wrong.
Yeah, it's like
in
no,
that situation,
just go back in and meet him.
Down,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, well, no, it's not that big a deal.
The pride side of it is literally such a big part. Is like you can call somebody out for being toxic and be like, wow, you're really acting kind of like this right now. Like, is that really who you want to be? And then they'll be like, oh, well,
Yeah, see, I would be like, no, I'm having a really fucking bad day and I'm super grumpy and I'm so sorry. Can we start over?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that's how people should be handling things. But I think when you're toxic, you have this issue of like, okay, you want to come off as the cool person, but
everyone's
then on top of
interpreted it wrong.
Yes. And then you're like, well, it's everyone else's problem. I'm not the one that's the problem, because you have this pride about you because you're the one that's like, correct.
And then I immediately felt my own defeat Where I
Yeah.
was like, because again, like I'm not trying to make this sound like I'm fucking was never toxic. Like no, plenty of toxic shit. But it wasn't, I don't think it was ever like my nature to actually be toxic.
Right.
But when I saw those things, I was like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to act. In that moment, it showed me exactly that, where it was like, no, you want to fucking meet that dude and get pictures. But what you think you should do is this. So it's not natural for you to be an asshole.
Cool guy too close to the sun.
Yes, I cool guy too close to the sun and fucking got burned up. Like, but I burnt myself. You know what I mean?
did.
I sat there and I was like, literally defeating myself, being like, no, you want to go do that, but it's like, no, stand your ground and be cool, because like that's, you know, somebody else told you that's what it was.
You know what you were
Another
doing?
toxic person told me that shit's not cool. So then I was like, oh, well, I really want to be cool because I'm always the bystander in these situations. So when I get the chance to lead the situation, I have to take all the forms of cool that someone else showed me how to be, rather than, again, growing and maturing, which at some point we do, and just being like whatever version of me I actually am.
Yes.
What were you going to say, Leah?
I was gonna say you're just SpongeBob in that episode with Grandma's cookies.
Yes.
Because you literally
yes,
are like,
Literally.
I'm not gonna have. I'm too old to
Wanting
have
them
Grandma's.
so bad.
But then the whole
And
time you're
Patrick's
just like,
Yes.
yeah, because that's the thing is it's like, and it's the pride. It was like oh yeah, I want to do this, but like all of a sudden it's like not cool because I made it sound not cool, and now I have to stand by the fact that this is not a cool thing or
Right,
whatever.
right. And
Yeah.
and that's even what I meant earlier when like I mentioned the other toxic part of like even later when I was an adult, the things I would identify is me projecting my wants and needs onto other people.
Yeah.
Not in that same way. Like
Right.
luckily I got past silly shit like that very quickly, but it would then turn into, again, like, oh, we're both involved in this thing, or we're both whatever. My opinion must be the one that's the coolest, and you must want to be doing it the way that I want to do it, and blah, blah, blah.
That's a good thing to acknowledge about yourself, though.
And that's something that I've tried. I think there's even times when we've been doing this podcast, I'll like kind of tell you guys an idea, even if I firmly, truly do believe it's what we should do. But I'm also like, yeah, but I mean, I don't want this to be like the Ross show. I have an idea, but I don't really know. And you guys are like, we're here for the ideas. Say the ideas, and we will talk about the ideas and make a decision based off of that. But it's
We'll
like,
tell you if it sucks.
right. But like some of that comes from that where I'm like, I want to make sure I'm not projecting.
You're almost going like too far back.
Yes. So it's like it's a constant balance that like I do think right now I'm better at than I ever have been before, but it's still a balance where I'm like, how delicate do I need to be with this situation? How do I let this, person down easy, or how do I whatever? But also, am I keeping myself in check to make sure that it's not a my way or the highway situation?
Yeah.
Because again, I have done those things before, and that's specific to like creative projects and stuff. But still, it's like, is this person enjoying it? Is this
Right.
person having fun? Or am I effectively, that person wants to go meet the vocalist and I'm saying it's not cool? Is it that situation
Yeah.
again, just in a different form?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's like another thing that I've tried to become as aware of as I can, is like subtle, like the subconscious toxicity coming out in the sense of you're not actually doing anything bad,
Right.
but what's
Well,
the
it's
result
unintentional
from this?
toxicity.
Yes.
Which we
actually,
we've got a
it's one of
bullet.
our bullet
Yeah.
points. Because I don't think anybody's setting out to be toxic. I think everybody is the hero of their own story in some way, shape, or form. And that's part of it is, we have this mentality of like everybody thinks that they are doing something for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Nobody out there is like, yeah, I'm going to be toxic today. Like,
never met my ex.
yeah. True. But I feel like there are people that set out because they're in a bad place that want to bring people down to their level.
And
for
they will
sure.
like convince themselves in their head that, like, as you're saying, they are right in their actions.
Exactly.
That's I had a interesting, I'll just say interesting, I'll keep the story like short because I don't want to share a lot of details, but like I had an interesting conversation with a friend where like we kind of dove into like our friendship leaned into maybe some toxic areas, and when we talked, it was this weird thing where like, I could identify like, okay, did I like help the friendship or hurt the friendship from my side? But what I also noticed is that a lot of what they were saying ultimately was kind of gaslighting me. And it's exactly what you're saying, where it's like from their side of things, this is everything that is right and wrong.
They've already had the conversation in their head about why they're right and why they're justified.
And when I was like hearing it, I was like, whoa, like that's actually, I was like, that doesn't actually make sense. And I don't actually know if I did that or said that thing. But I do kind of just believe you because you believe it so much. Right? And it's like I'm usually good at taking accountability for things when I know I need to. But it was such an interesting conversation where I was like, it was just sort of stuff where, you know, they were like, yeah, and then you did this. And I was like, I did? And I'm like, whoa, am I like blackout toxic or something? You know what I mean? Do I like actually do things that I never, you know, do I not know?
Yeah.
But then I was like, or did I not necessarily do that? But that was their perception of it. But all I can do is take accountability for something that I didn't even ultimately know if I did or not.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And again, it's like, was I projecting wants and needs? And was I projecting something that then made them turn it into something else? And then I'm like, well damn, I can't tell you that you're wrong.
Yeah, it just goes back into the, you don't get to decide if you hurt somebody else's feelings because their reality is for them. But it also, that then rolls into the, okay, but it's also their responsibility to handle how they feel about that interaction.
And
it's not your responsibility.
I think it's different too. If I'm saying we should talk about these things because I'm a little bit hurt about this, and then they had no interest about that before, but now that it's brought to a head, they're like, well, what about when you did this? And it's like, we can talk about that too, but like, this is the problem that I'm having. It's a lot of like trying to maneuver around, well, if I'm going to be a bad guy, you're going to be a bad guy too.
Right.
If I go down, you're going down.
Yes.
Or I only did that because you did this. Okay, well, that's toxic behavior because two wrongs don't make a right. So you're trying to hurt me because I hurt you by accident. Like, you are going out of your way to intentionally hurt me because I unintentionally hurt you.
Right.
When you could have just told me, hey, this thing that you did hurt my feelings, or did this, you know, caused this in my life, and then we work through it that way. So I feel like that's the thing, is like, you can be unintentionally toxic in a way where it's like, oh, like I did something that like bled out into your life in some way. But if you choose to be toxic in return, just to be like, to spite your friend,
person,
that speaks volumes about,
because people make mistakes.
Yeah, who you are.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. Like, and that's another thing, is like the word toxic probably gets thrown around more than it has on this podcast. But in
the same amount,
like,
I'd say everybody's out there calling everybody a narcissist, and nobody actually even knows what that means.
Right. So yes, anybody does anything, they're like, oh my God, that's so toxic. And I'm like, no, you just didn't like it. That's what, you just didn't like it.
Yeah.
Someone actually doing something toxic is this person trying to control this person's life and be shitty to them and all this sort of stuff. No, those are toxic things.
Yes.
Someone saying that like your sports team sucked.
Right. Or someone having a really bad day and like taking it out on you a little bit is toxic, but that does not mean that it's like, you can't come back from that.
It's the unintentional toxicity that we were just talking about. It's like that is going to happen. It's just going to happen because, again, everybody's perspectives are their own. Everybody's living their own lives. Everybody, all this sort of stuff. I'm sure there's probably stories in the last 10 years where I have been
I can name like
toxic
50 things
to somebody,
that I've done.
but I didn't know it, right? If it was never brought up or if it was never whatever, I was unintentionally toxic to somebody that I ultimately, if it, it didn't end up getting addressed. And there's probably somebody walking around right now that's like, Ross just released a new episode of his podcast talking about toxicity. Yeah, he's one to talk. It's like, well, maybe I don't know, because I'm sure that something like that has happened when actually, another small example, but like Josh, like the dude I do a lot of video production stuff with, he had mentioned to me that like a person that like I used to be friends with like years and years ago, like kind of fresh out of high school, had like started a band, and in like 2014 hit me up about like a music video. And I just ran him through the process of like, hey man, like it'd be really cool, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we need from you. Keep in mind, like our budgets are this, like this is what we're trying to do, blah, blah. I was very much like, hey, we can make it happen, but here's how and why. What I didn't know is that pissed him off, and he's fucking hated me ever since. Just because I didn't jump for joy and say, oh my God, let's shoot a video. You're my best friend, which we weren't best friends. We were acquaintances. But I'm like, because I did my thing of like, hey, like, yeah, I'm like, hey, I'm going to be professional about this. Let's do it. But because I wasn't like, oh my God, let's do it for free. Let's do it tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. Where Josh comes into that is he sort of knew him. saw him at a show like 2 years ago or something. And he brought me up and was like, yeah, Ross a fucking asshole. And Josh was like, what? And told him that story. Like, yeah, I hit him up on a music video with you guys and he just treated me like shit. And he's like, well, what did he say? And he's like, oh, he just told me all this shit about like what the budget needed to be, acting like I wasn't able to be professional and blah, blah, blah. And Josh was like, I gotta be honest, he probably didn't say that.
So it sounds like he was doing his job.
Yes. And Josh was like, oh, well, like, I'm sure if you just talked to him about it, I'm sure you'd find out that that's not what it was. And the dude was like, nah, fuck him. So to that person, I am a toxic person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
I know there are people, we talked about this kind of a lot on the way to Horror Hound or back or whatever. There are people that just hate me. Like that
Yeah.
like don't know me at all. They might have heard like one thing or
Right.
maybe like brush shoulders with me once.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck
I think that's
that
most
girl.
people, though. Most people
hate me?
No. Most people hate Brittany. No, I think most
Leah's
people
like, yeah,
I hate Brittany.
If
I'm
I
in the
could
club.
speak for all of us,
Yeah. If I could speak for everyone here at the We Hate Brittany Club, we just want to let you know that you suck.
Princess Lumpy butt.
But no, I definitely feel like everybody has somebody out there that has a perception of them that is either incorrect or it's based on something where it was like a bad day. And like, not that I think that like toxic people don't exist, like,
Right.
you know, whatever. But I also think that if you don't at least like acknowledge it to that person and say like, hey, I didn't like that you did this, then I think that you're just holding a grudge for no reason at that point, because if you didn't even give that person a chance
opportunity.
to, like,
then you
prove
can
that
find
they're
out
not-
how toxic they are, you know.
Yeah.
Because then
Yeah.
if it turns into gaslighting and they're like, no, I never did that, then you're like, oh, yes, you intentionally did that. You are a toxic person.
Yeah.
Or if it's like, oh, shit, I didn't know that I made you feel that way.
Yeah.
Damn, my bad. Like, this is what I actually meant, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Then you're like, oh, that was
Yeah.
unintentional.
Yeah.
Cool.
There are definitely people out there that don't like me. And I used to be
welcome to the We Hate Leah Club.
welcome.
Brittany,
I can't do
What
it.
do you think about Leah? You have to do it. We did the voice. You have to do
I'm
it.
not doing it.
You
Don't
can
peer
do it.
pressure me.
Wow,
That's
I'm joining the
toxic.
We Hate Brittany Club now.
Oh, see, we did
You
it.
guys, you just got a little too
we
close.
both. Oh my god, we were. And
Wow,
that
full circle.
was a lesson for our viewers at home.
But I'm going to communicate with you two and tell you that really hurt my feelings and that was a little too far.
And we will apologize.
We're sorry, Brittany. We're sorry, Brittany.
Oh, sorry, I'll never do that again.
Oh my
Great.
god.
By the way, none of you have like a We Hate Ross Club, do you?
I'm wearing
On
a
the
We Hate-
Patreon.
If you want to join the We Hate Ross Club, you have to join the Patreon. But don't worry, it's the lowest tier because we want as many members as we can get in the We Hate Ross Club.
And you pushed
now-
too far.
I'm hurt.
I'm sorry, Ross. See how easy this is?
Yes,
See, you guys?
it's not a
Come
big
on.
deal.
This is an after-school special of honestly saying.
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like there's always going to be people that don't like you for one reason or another.
I
out
kind
there.
of like that. It kind of makes life a little spicy. As long as I genuinely didn't hurt them. Like if it's something like, oh, I just heard that she's a little whatever. Oh my God, I love that. Write a book about me.
Hell yeah.
Like I really don't care because
Yeah.
they're either telling someone else that doesn't know me and that's not going to affect me unless I like.
I will say I do often feel that way about things too, where I'm like, this person doesn't have a good read on me. I am ultimately like, man, if that person's perception of me turns into them telling somebody else about a perception and that person believes it, blah, blah, blah. Those are ultimately people that, and I'll use this phrasing, I don't think those people are intelligent enough for me to be concerned about.
Yeah.
Because I want to make when somebody tells me like, oh, that person fucking sucks, I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm like, all right, depending on what story you tell me, do they
Yeah.
actually suck or did you have a weird interaction with
it's
them?
also-
But then I'm going to choose whether I think that person sucks or not.
Yeah.
Right? Again, depending on the story. If someone's
Absolutely.
like, yo, this dude did this, he's a fucking asshole, I'm like, man, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
I don't need to associate with him. But if it's like, oh yeah, one day he said, you know, he posted this online and I didn't like it. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, damn, I hope he's not a douche like that. But I'll see when I meet him.
Yeah.
You know, and then
Yeah.
I'll decide if it's true or not. Because That's what I think. It's like you got to make a decision, for yourself, depending on the level of toxic this person sounds like they are.
Well, when I was in a toxic relationship, and this is before I obviously like realized I was still in honeymoon phase, whatever, and this guy that I was dating told me things about this other girl that was like in the same like music scene and whatever, and all these things about her. And then I ran into her somewhere. She goes, "Oh, I can't believe you're dating so-and-so because, he does X, Y, and Z." And I'm like, "Well, he said this about you." And she's just like, "Well, that's not true." So then I'm sitting there and I'm like, I have two different versions. Am I going to believe this girl I barely know or the guy that I'm literally dating? But ultimately,
The girl's never lying.
the thing was, there was like supposedly he thought she liked him and that she was just out to like, get back at him for not wanting her back, kind of a thing. And both of their stories were that like he said, "Oh, she was flirting with me, but she had a boyfriend," and she said, "No, he was flirting with me and he had a girlfriend." And I was like, okay, so somebody somewhere is lying to me about this, whatever. But I didn't know this girl that well. And, based on just like everything that he was telling me and stuff, like she and I had a bumpy relationship because like I was just like, oh, I'm hanging out with somebody that clearly does not like this girl and she clearly does not like him. And so I've been lumped in with this guy and, whatever. And so one day, I noticed that she had deleted me off Facebook, and I was like, all right, this is the final straw. Like, I did not do anything to this girl. And I felt like there were all these things of like me hearing stuff, like she had made some offhand remarks and blah, 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 probably because she thought I was siding with my boyfriend or whatever. I didn't break up with him. And so I sent her a message and I was like, "Did you really delete me?" And she's like, "I thought you hated me." And I was like, "Well, I thought you hated me because you've done X, Y, and Z." And she's like, "Well, I know you're dating so-and-so and I know that he thinks these things about me." And I was like, "Well, something about me, is that I like to make judgments."
Yeah, that's not my
on my
business
own.
what he thinks about you.
Yeah, I'm like, what happened before he and I were together is not my business. Like, if anything did happen between you guys, that's not my business. It was before me. It has nothing to do with me. And I'm not going to have a grudge against somebody that literally, like, I don't know that well or on a personal enough level where, like, I just decided that you're a bad person because of what somebody else said when I haven't experienced it myself.
Like, if someone were to reach out to Zach at the beginning of a relationship and say, "She's done X, Y, Z in the past," and he was like, "She's going to do that to me, I should leave her," that would have ruined my whole life because I made mistakes when I was like in my early 20s. You know what I mean? He ended up being a shitty dude, right?
Yeah.
But had he not, and he just like made a mistake when he was talking to this girl, that like throws off the whole thing. But I do understand if she was coming to you because he like hurt her in some way that wasn't like emotional, whatever. But to just like lump you in that way and then all of a sudden you're evil.
Well, and that was the thing, is a lot of people lumped me in with this guy because this guy had a lot of enemies. So like the whole music scene was pretty much like either you loved this guy or you hated this guy, and I was dating him. So a lot of the people that hated him then hated me because I dated him. And I'm sure probably still have ideas about who I am as a person because I dated him and because of how I probably acted while I was dating him.
Well, because you're trying to navigate that situation. That's not an easy one to...
Yeah, exactly. So, no, but that's the thing, is I think that there are ideas that people can have of you in their mind or whatever, based on an interaction that, either happened or that they heard happened and it was just a telephone game. If you do not like face those problems head on and actually have a conversation with that person, like, hey, I either heard that this happened or this happened to me and it rubbed me wrong. Like, what are we doing about it? I think if you gaslight somebody into thinking you didn't do those things when you did, that makes you toxic. But I think it's the intention of like, oh shit, like I'm really sorry because I didn't know it came off that way, to you or to that person or whatever. And that wasn't my intention.
And that's
different.
Yeah. And that's also what I would want. I would want anyone to do that. Like, I know it's awkward conversations and no one wants like confrontation, but also it's like, hey, I think there's a ton of value in like if you feel wronged by somebody or you don't, whatever, it's like
don't
have a conversation.
That.
Have a conversation about it. Like,
don't hold that grudge.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like hold them accountable if you do really think that they like did something super toxic, but it's like toss them a message, toss them a text, whatever. Like, hey, and because then again, you will, based off their reaction, you will find out whether your perception, assumption, whatever is correct or incorrect.
And decide what to do from there.
Yeah.
What's our closing thoughts for this episode?
I want to talk about Jonah Hill. That can be our closing thoughts.
Let's wrap up with good old Jonah Hill. He was super bad.
Oh no. Boo.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Thank you to my fans.
As you can see, I've grown from earlier in the episode. I'm no longer a part of any hate anyone fan clubs.
I'm like in your face saying boo though, so I'm not like.
Yeah, honestly, that was pretty. At least you were like authentic about it and honest. I really appreciate your
Everyone,
honesty.
there's value to being authentically toxic. If it's you, no one can tell
own
you
your toxicity.
otherwise.
Oh my god. No, but realistically,
Work it.
There's Jonah Hill stuff that came out somewhat. By the time this episode airs, God only knows.
Yeah, it'd probably be like back in 2023, back when that was talked about.
But the whole situation, if you're not familiar, it was essentially some text messages leaked about his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, who is a surfer, and he was very controlling over who she was allowed to hang out with, what she was allowed to wear when hanging out with said people. He didn't like her modeling, even though it was her job, and a lot of people were referring to his behavior as toxic because it was controlling. And when she tried to meet him in the middle and talk to him about how, like, why she felt that it was toxic, he did gaslight her by saying, honestly, by using therapy talk and using words like boundaries to try to make it sound like she was crossing a line by living her own life, and like he wasn't capable of walking out of her life if he
and
was
we've all
uncomfortable
heard
with
the
those
whole
things.
thing which like boundaries are for you, not for other people.
Yes.
Like you create the boundaries. He could have easily said, I don't feel comfortable dating a surfer because I'm a tiny little man baby.
Yeah.
And I would have been like, respect.
Bye.
But instead you say, you're really hot and I want you as my girlfriend, but don't go be really hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a girl
for
in
no
real
one
life.
else but to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're existing in the world as
Right.
yourself.
Yeah, literally, he was just telling her, don't exist.
She
Do not
wasn't
be perceived.
doing anything
Yeah.
crazy at all. Yeah, don't go out there be
Just-
perceived.
yeah,
and
don't
don't
be
you dare
perceived.
want to be perceived either.
Yeah.
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 I mean, and I think that's part of it too, is a lot of toxicity revolves around control. You want to have control over a situation. So like you want to come off as like big, tough, macho leader guy in a situation because you want control over how people are perceiving you. And
The control thing is really important because a lot of my toxic things that I did were like post my most toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be like, I am in control of my situation.
Yes.
And so I'm doing all of these like crazy things because no one can tell me otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That's
think
similar
that's
for mine.
definitely
Yeah.
same thing where it's like I feel like a lot of, like I said, like one of the toxic things I mentioned earlier was going through somebody's phone. I wanted to feel like I had control over the situation by knowing instead of guessing and sitting there feeling like I
Or
had no
asking
idea.
because you might not get a truthful answer.
Exactly. And so my idea of like having control over a situation where I felt powerless was to do the toxic thing of like going through somebody's phone instead of trusting, whatever it was that they were telling me was going on. So yeah, it might have been a toxic behavior, but it's all about control over a situation that you don't have control over. So if you're uncomfortable in a situation because you're dating somebody that's really attractive and there are other people, obviously, like this person is a celebrity, like there are going to be people all in those DMs, all commenting things about your appearance on social media and all of that different stuff. I feel like if you're going to be putting yourself in a situation where you don't have control over something you're uncomfortable with, you have to be open and honest about how you feel about those things in ways that are healthy.
Yes.
And not trying to control another person in that way. And if you're trying to control other people to make the situation cater towards you, that's literally what toxicity is.
Yes. And it can feel small, and you can do that in small increments and think that you're like getting by and like this little thing's okay. But when you've added 12 things on top of that little thing that your partner can't do, or you get upset if your friend does, or whatever the situation is, like that's going to snowball and you are going to be left by yourself
Yeah.
to wonder what happened. I will say, as far as the Jonah Hill thing goes, we're not sitting here like cancel Jonah Hill. You know what I mean? We're just talking about his behavior and trying to learn from it and grow from it and things like that, because he is not the only, like, I have those text messages in my phone from other men in my life, you know, periodically
Sure.
through my entire life, because that is how society has built up this whole situation. The thing that I'm scared of for him is I don't know if he'll grow from it. And that's the part that sucks. I totally am okay with people making mistakes,
Yeah.
owning them, and trying to grow.
Stutz, come get your boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needs to be twice a week.
Yeah. Up the dose.
God, in trying to grow, but it just, some people will just double down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They want to stay in the car while their friends get the signature.
Yeah.
Yes.
They want to
Use me as the
They
bad
don't,
example.
yeah, they don't care what you're going in there to get. They're staying in the car because they said whatever you're getting is not that cool.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of it, is there's a stubbornness that goes along with toxicity. And I think that one of the worst things you can do if you experience, I don't know, being toxic or whatever, is not being open to the idea that you could be wrong or that you could change.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest thing in most situations. In my opinion, I feel like if you're going into any situation without at least the tiniest idea, like, I could be wrong, I could be acting incorrectly, I could be speaking incorrectly, I could be making points that are untrue. If you don't go into any situation thinking there's even a chance that you could be wrong or proven wrong about something, then why are you even in that situation?
Yeah. And I think about it, and I'm never kind of expecting whether I'll be wrong or not in that way, but I am never going to be defensive if someone ever comes in with anything. Like, I'm always a little bit shocked because, of course, we all try not to be that person.
Sure.
But like, my first thing is to like drop my face, because this is not what this is about right now, and like really be listening. And if it's something that I can acknowledge immediately like listen and apologize. But I'm always afraid to be the person that like sticks up for myself. But when people have stuck up for themselves to me about certain things, I will take it so easily. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, that scenario makes so much sense. I see how you saw that. This is what I meant. Or yeah, I was having a shitty day and I'm really sorry. And then we just grow and move and everything is fine. We just nip it in the bud. It's when you let it fester, and
if you let it get away from you to a point where you don't even have control over the situation you were trying to control anymore.
Yeah.
Because now you're sitting there thinking, oh, I really wish that I hadn't done that, but I've already like been so stubborn in this situation that now I can't do anything about it, and I have to stick with this. I have to die on this mountain.
Jonah Hill.
Or this Jonah Hill. I
You
have to die on this
Jonah Hill.
Wow.
I am just,
Please don't die on your toxic Jonah Hill.
yeah.
Wow.
I guess that's the end. The
That's a
message I
good
want
way to
end
wrap
on.
up.
That's the final thing. Yeah,
If you're being
identify those,
toxic, just be.
We all have it a little bit in us. Not that that's a good thing that we should normalize, but we should all be aware. That way we can be constantly making sure that we are reprimanding any scenarios that we are walking into as humans. And that way we're just being thoughtful about other people and hopefully getting that in return.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Did we do it?
Loves it. Yeah.
We really ran up that Jonah Hill.
That was super bad.
We really ran up that Jonah Hill. How about in auto-tune? Does it make it better when it's auto-tune?
Yeah, everything's better in auto-tune. That was good.
That was also
All right, I'm
pretty
hitting
good.
this button.
Oh,
wait, we got to say
no,
where
that
you
was
can
I
find
was
us.
literally just like that was just the ender. At Honestly Same Pod.